All right, the next lecture in the Project Management Lecture Series presented by the Houston program is Sustaining a Project Long Term, Part 1. My name is Laura Stokes. I am a PGY2 Health System Pharmacy Administration resident from MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. And let's go ahead and get started. Today we'll define sustainability, we'll discuss types of sustainability, and we'll discuss a little bit about the rationale why you need to come up with a sustainability plan for your project. We'll talk through some of the components of coming up with this plan and what this plan looks like. And finally, I'll summarize a few tips to help as you think through your sustainability plan. So sustainability, I think there's many synonyms out there. I think our minds go maybe many ways when we think of sustainability. Some that I came up with were maybe unending, unceasing, or continuous, like a continuous quality improvement project. In the previous lecture series, we've in our question and discussion section at the end, we talked about how, like, when does a project really end, or is it always a CQI cycle, especially in healthcare? Viable or viability, which kind of makes us think like long term, how is this going to last? And then last but not least, if anybody knows me, you probably, or if you're like me, you're going to think about sort of the environmental or agricultural implications of sustainability. So those are some radishes from my garden I'm really proud of.
They look delicious.
So sustainability of projects, essentially what you're doing is you're continuing the goals of the projects and the principles and efforts to achieve whatever the desired outcomes that you set out to achieve in the beginning were. And kind of building a little bit off of what Dr. Smith said in the last lecture, you want to ensure that these goals continue whether you're still there or not. And so when we think of sustainability of projects, it really depends on what kind of project we're talking about, right? So if, for example, your project is a grant-funded project and at the end of your grant, your money runs out, how are you going to sustain whatever you found long-term without money? So those are the types of things that you need to think about. Other things you might consider besides dollars are resources. So in healthcare, we often think of personnel resources or time allocation, and then also sort of the changing climate of what strategic priorities are for maybe your organization may impact how you can sustain your project. Often the sustainability piece or the sustainability planning is omitted from project planning, and so it's the point of this lecture is to really try to highlight the importance and to sell you on the fact that you really should spend your time working on this in order to have optimal outcomes in the long run. So as I alluded to a moment ago, there's many types of sustainability when you're talking about a project and different things that you should consider. The first is financial sustainability, so basically ensuring that you have a steady flow of funds and you're able to generate enough revenue to continue the work that you implemented initially. And institutional or organizational sustainability is basically you want to make sure that by the time your project is done, your organization or the components of the organization that were added get to stay or are maintained when the project is complete. And then finally, programmatic sustainability, which I think is maybe the most relevant scope of this lecture series, is the continuation of a project or a program once the formal support is removed. So the rationale, why do we have to think about this or plan for this? A couple of reasons that I think maybe were the most poignant to me are that you can build more robust partnerships with stakeholders. And so what I mean by that is you're setting up a process that's not necessarily dependent on a particular funding source or a particular individual or a particular group of individuals to maintain. For example, one that I am working on for my thesis project is that I implemented a bedside medication delivery program. And my biggest fear especially taking on such a program, is that when I leave, who's going to do it? But coming up with a sustainability plan, it doesn't depend on the people. As long as you have the right processes in place, you don't need individuals. And so that's a big benefit. Another benefit is you can synthesize and understand the long-term impact of the interventions you make. So it's really great, especially for a resident project, to do a data collection period of 6 months and be able to present that data. But how much more impactful would it be to show a 5-year trend or a 10-year trend of a service that you implemented or that you started with during your resident year, right? Like, it's more impactful. And then finally, one of the most important things when you're sustaining a project is if you can make your project align with the organization's strategic initiatives, you'll have a lot of intrinsic support, which will make this project go further than maybe you could have made it go alone. So how do you plan for sustainability? The first thing that you have to do is clarify your vision. So remember, just to kind of put this into perspective a little bit, you've planned your project, you've implemented your project, you've completed your project, you've thought about your project, and now you're done. And so what do you do now? So you have to clarify the vision. And that vision might not be the same vision you started with when you started your project. The next piece is to determine the components that you wish to sustain. So essentially establishing a scope. An example that comes to mind from my organization is in 2015, we implemented a transitions of care program that was grant funded. And because it was grant funded and because we were supposed to report back metrics, we had to do a significant amount of data collection, which was very labor intensive. However, that amount of data collection in the system that we have and the way that we have reporting is totally not sustainable. And so in the phase 3 and phase 4, what we did was we worked together to streamline what was collected so that we're still having that same robust impact with less work on the back end. And so that's kind of one way you can do it. The literature recommends using a data-driven approach to figure out what the value-added steps are. And so empirically, that means you basically need to collect data during your project to be able to answer this question on the back end. The next piece, which I think has been a common theme throughout all of the lectures that we've had to date, is to build collaboration. It's that communication, it's that constant feedback cycle that has to happen to continue to engage your stakeholders or groups and make sure that everybody is on the same page and still committed to the project even when the project is completed. The next step is maybe the most challenging, maybe the most labor intensive, which is creating a detailed plan for sustainability. And so often this detailed plan for sustainability is a separate business plan that utilizes the data from the initial project to justify moving forward with the project. Whenever you do that, there are several questions that you maybe should answer in the business plan, depending on who you're going to show it to. Basically, what you did, what's going to stay the same, what's going to be different, is there anything new or different that's going to be added, and why? Those are some important things that your stakeholders might ask and might be important to be able to justify, not only with anecdotal experience, but data as well. And then finally, you want to document and communicate the success of the programs that you've implemented. So it kind of goes back to that long-term value of sustaining a project, right? So whenever you implement a project, you have your initial reveal of the data. But as you continue to collect data and you continue to work on the program and have the program as part of your organization, it's important to regularly report status updates and data to remind people why they're still participating in this and why they should still value this and give you resources to do this. So a few tips. The first is to set clear and realistic expectations. it's easy to shoot for the stars, but that's kind of not what you're doing in the sustainability piece. You're shooting for the stars when you're implementing your project and initiating your project, but this is sort of how do you maintain so that you can take what you've learned and shoot for the stars on the next project or whatever you apply the results to. Another thing that's really valuable and sort of a unique perspective to me was to use these outcomes and these checkpoints of your long-term project as tools to continue to market yourself, your service, your program, etc. And so as we know from previous coursework, some of the things that we might consider or some of the ways that we can maybe frame the data is to put it into one of the 4P categories: products, price, place, or promotion, as a way to sort of sell it. It's also something that you can add into that business plan that you're going to make for your sustainability. And then the last thing is to continue to actively pursue resources that you need to maintain your program. And so this is especially important in funded projects or grant funded projects. If your grant funding is going to run out, it's very important to sort of consider diversifying your funding sources so that you can continue to do similar types of things or expand or grow or stay the exact same. So in summary, when sustaining a project, you're essentially continuing the goals of the project that you had initially set out, but in a way that continues to achieve the desired outcomes, but is a way that is perhaps a little bit easier to maintain in terms of resources and in terms of support. That's not sort of individual or group or particular grant funding specific. The next piece I really want to highlight today is that sustainability is an essential part of all projects because you want to make sure that you're aligned with strategic initiatives, and then that helps you get stakeholder buy-in. You can also use this to assess the long-term impact of your interventions. And then finally, the last point I want to make and remind everyone is that sustainability does require significant planning. So plan to plan whenever you're working to sustain your project. And at this time, I'll take your questions.
Source? What's the source?
So I used a couple. So I cited a few on the slides, and then I also, there's like a textbook, I can't remember the exact name. It's called like Project Management Developing Sustainability Plans. It's kind of like the text on this.
Okay.
So I pulled a few excerpts from there, did some reading from there. And then I also was a lot of sort of the sustaining a project like literature, if you do a quick Google search, is in relationship to like financially funded projects. And so I kind of read up on some of that too.
My impression is, what does everyone think, that this section and a little bit the closure section is way less written about than
Yes.
starting and
Totally.
I think there's a
thinking.
reason for that, though.
Me too, because people will think about the size of the work.
I don't even know that it's they don't think about it. It's much messier.
Yep.
Because you can have a stepwise process to initiate one, but depending on the project, the scope of the project, and the team members involved, closing one down is very different.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Who did the starting stuff? Anybody here? Which of you guys did the beginning of project section? Towards the beginning. You asked the last question too. Did you see any similarities here?
I mean, to me, mine was on, I focused a lot on communication, but I mean, I think that's a theme for all of it, but I think especially with sustaining projects, identifying who will take ownership of who you're gonna pass on. You can close out a project, but if you wanna sustain it, you need to identify which key stakeholders are gonna help you sustain a project. So communication again is key, but identifying who your key players are, who's the most qualified to be able to sustain a project, I think you can draw some similarities there.
Then do you see, because I when I hear this, I think I just hear restarting a project again, kind of thing, in the thematic of vision, get your communication together, get your stakeholders together, align with the stars, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of a like a two-pronged approach, right? So you're sustaining your project, but at various points you're collecting this additional data, right? Or this data that you did from the first project, but now you have this like long-term trend. So maybe this long-term trend tells you something that sparks this new great idea that you use as a jumping off point for your next
Yeah.
project, right? So I think it's kind of two, right? Like it can help you build to your next project, but it's a project in itself, and so I guess it depends on how you look at
Yeah.
it.
All through this lecture, I'm trying to say, I have a professional career that's moving along. And then within that professional career, like projects come and projects go, and this project goes, but then it goes this way, and like, but this is my professional career. Can you put this together? Like, how do projects in our profession go together? Okay, I mean, you're trying to reflect on all this stuff. Do we ever do a project? Do we always just do CQI? Can you distinguish two? Do we need to distinguish two?
Um, so let me think about how I want to answer this. I think I think our career is made up of many projects, and I think what we do is each project we sort of learn tools and tactics and sort of gain things, just like wisdom right along the way that kind of like I this is gonna sound silly, like I guess I could say that wisdom that I've gained along the way has sort of gotten me into situations where now I have this new thing, right? Like that I wouldn't have had if I wouldn't have had this previous experience. So I think in that way it leads, but I think, roles change, which changes your project, right? Which maybe wouldn't fit that paradigm. Um, and I mean, I wonder, maybe Dr. Gary, maybe I throw it back at you, right? Like for your type of work, right? Like you do a project and because you're like benchtop research, from your project you learn something that sparks a question that makes you want to do that. In healthcare, I might be working on a project that's operations focused, and then I might be working on a project that's not pharmacy related at all, but it's important to the executive, so I do it. And you know what I mean? Like, while there are things that kind of go together, I sometimes wonder if I just free fall through
Yeah.
my life. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
So we're in hiring season right now. So we've got 4, maybe even 5 faculty lines, and we're replacing Lynn, who's retiring, as everyone knows, and some other people. So in this, it's a project. These people are going away. These people are coming on board. I have to offload board these guys, onboard these guys. So that's all projects. But the thing that's happening, the PharmD curriculums, let's say in this case, is continuing. And
Sure.
that maintain, and in all honesty, then this onboarding is really CQI while I'm doing this nice project called hiring a new person. And it's trying to blend these two together. It's super fascinating in my mind because all these concepts are really good. And
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe I think the wisdom part is the best word to use.
Right.
If I've done that before, I know I have wisdom to be able to do it again.
Right, right. And I picked that word on purpose because in the discipline of project management, there's very precise definitions for what is a project versus what is a task, etc. So I don't like to say like, oh, my life is this series of projects, whatever, because it doesn't fit the classic definition um, per the discipline. But like, I think we can all say like, hey, like every time we do something, we learn and we gain and we pick something up that's gonna help us on the next thing we do, whatever it is.
Very good. Nice job.
Right.